So in this movie, we're going to do a simple save and load of data from a couple of user interface elements. What I'm looking at is a nib file that I've already created that's pretty simple. It actually just has a date picker and a text field on it. And both that date picker and text field have been hooked up to a couple of outlets called MyDate and MyText. That's about as complex as this interface gets. If I flick over into Xcode, and I'm going to take a look at my header file from my view controller. Not surprisingly, what I'm going to see on line 12 and 13 is the declarations for the UI text field and the UI date picker and their corresponding properties on line 15 and 16. So our interface is defined and our header file is defined. Over in the implementation file, however, we've got kind of a different story. Apart from the synthesize statement that we have for the MyText text field and the MyDate date picker, what I have here is two empty method declarations. I'm just going to drag this up a little wider to see most of them. And these are just there to save some time. I've got a method called saveFilePath, which returns a pointer to an NS string. And that's going to actually give us the file path that we want to use to both save and load from. And because we're going to call it at least twice, once to save and once to load, I'm just going to wrap it in a method to make things a little easier. And then on line 19, we have a declaration for a method called applicationWillTerminate. We will make sure that this method is called automatically when perhaps the user clicks the home button or the iPhone receives a call for whatever reason that the iPhone OS is telling our application, hey, I am about to close down and you better do whatever it is you need to do because you're going away within a few seconds. So I'm going to start declaring this save file path method and actually starting to fill out the contents of that. Now you might think that what I could do is just ask the iPhone OS, hey, give me my documents directory. After all, we should really only have one, but unfortunately it's not that simple. And one of the reasons for that is that we're actually dealing with kind of older style Cocoa calls rather than stuff that's iPhone specific. So we have to give it a bit more data than we might otherwise have to do if it was just for the iPhone. I'm going to create an array called path array, because what I'm going to call is going to potentially return multiple paths, even though we're only interested in one. And the way that I'm going to do it is by calling a fairly long function call here called ns search path for directories in domains. Now this might seem like a really long call here, and it is actually a C-style function call, so it doesn't need to be in square brackets. But what I need to do is pass this just a couple of different pieces of information. The first thing, I'm going to say ns document directory, which tells it, yes, we're just looking for the document directory. And then after that, I have to give it a piece of information that says it's really me. And this is called a domain mask, and I'm going to use the ns user domain mask. And then finally, we have a little Boolean for expand tilde here, meaning give me the full path, not any kind of relative path. I'm just going to say yes. So this should return an array. And really we can think all we're interested in is one path. And in fact, at position 0 of the array, we should have the path to our document directory. But notice that this method is called saveFilePath. It's not just the directory path we want. We want to actually append a file name to it. So I'm going to do this by returning the contents of path array, whatever's at position 0, but I'm nesting that inside a call, and I'm going to kind of concatenate it here with calling string by appending path component, and just give it the name of a file, something like saved data.plist. There's nothing magical about the name. You can pretty much call it whatever you want, but by convention we are, of course, ending it in .plist as it's a property list file. So this should be all I need for the save file path method. Now, on line 21, we've got the application will terminate method, which will arrange to be called whenever the application is about to quit. What we're going to do in there is create an array and initialize it with the contents of both the text field and the date picker value that's currently in our nib file. So I'm going to use the init with objects, then first give it myText.text, comma, myDate.date, and comma, nil, as the nil object to finish off this array and to mark that it's the end of it. Now I have that array called values together. The great thing is what I can do is just say values write to file atomically. And all that I have to do is first pass it the save file path from calling the save file path method. And then the other parameter that I have here is called atomically, and I'm going to say yes. Now what this means is that we're telling the iPhone I want it to use a bit of internal magic here to make sure that as it's creating this file, it's never going to save it in a half-finished state. It's actually going to make sure that it gets atomically created and that it won't be counted as being saved until the whole thing has actually been done. And this is a good thing, so I'm going to leave it at that. And now we're done with this array, so I can say values release. But here's the question. How do I know that this application will terminate method will be called? Well, you might think it's a delegate method and it will automatically happen, and you're kind of half right there, because the problem is that the application will terminate gets called automatically in your appdelegate.m file, not in your viewcontroller.m file, and the viewcontroller is where we want it to happen because that's where we have our data. But what we can do is tell our application that yes, we want our viewcontroller to be notified when this happens. So we're going to need to add a little code to our viewDidLoad method. I'm going to come down to that. And I've actually put in a bunch of code there. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is on line 59. This is a fairly simple line, and really all I'm doing is creating a variable that represents my application. So UI application my app equals UI application shared application. We're grabbing hold of the singleton object that represents our application, and we're going to use it on line 61. Now line 61 is really just one statement. I've just split it across multiple lines so it's more readable. We're calling the NS Notification Center default center, adding ourself as an observer, and then passing in our selector, which is really representing our method application will terminate. We're then saying that the thing we want to be notified about is the application will terminate notification, and the object we want to be notified is my app. That's what we created on line 59. So these two statements on line 59 and 61 will actually take care of really subscribing us to that notification so that our code here in our view controller will be called when that notification happens. And coming back up a little bit, here's what we actually need to do anyway. This method, of course, will be called when our application loads. Now, the first time it loads, we may not have any saved values to load, but we're going to go look for them anyway. So on line 48, what I'm going to do is call the saveFilePath method and store that in a string called myPath. On line 49, I'm going to check to see, does that file actually exist? Think about it this way. The first time the application runs, that file won't exist. So we're going to have to check to see if it exists, and then if it does, we'll do one thing. If it doesn't, we'll do something else. So on line 49, I have a bool file exists, which is going to be created based on a call to the file exists at path method, passing in the path we got from line 48. Then I ask, if that file exists, yep, we've got some saved values. Well, on line 53, create an array and load it with the contents of the file at that path location. Then on line 54, set the text field based on the first element of the array, and then set the date field based on the second element of the array. Then we're done with the array and we can release it. So that's the entirety of our viewDidLoad. Check to see if the file exists. If it does, load in the data into the elements in our nib file, and then make sure that we're going to be informed when the application terminates. Up a little bit, we have our application will terminate code. So when the application exits, we're going to create an array based on the current state of the text field and the date picker. We're then going to save that to a file, and then we're going to be done. We're going to end. So I'm going to save this and build and go. And the first time it loads, we're not going to see anything remarkable because we don't really have any data to work with. What I'm going to do is change the date of the date picker to, let's say, October the 8th at 5:15 a.m. And then I'm going to type some sample data into the text field. Now, I haven't even bothered with doing any code to dismiss the keyboard away, but this should work just fine. So let's say we want to quit the application, or a telephone call is coming in, or the batteries are running low. We're going to exit out of the application. We could even restart the iPhone simulator here, But when I click this application to open it again, we're loading in that data, and even the date picker is actually animating to those values. So I'm going to change the data into anything else and change the date again here to September the 28th at 4:10 p.m. Exit out of that, reload it again, and even watch it reanimate back to those values. So we're saving data when the application exits, and then when the application loads, we're just reading it back in and reconstructing the state of the nib the way we want it.